In today's video, you are going to learn how to set up your own neurologic recovery program that is absolutely guaranteed to improve your quality of life. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara, I'm a neurologic physical therapist, and on this channel we talk about anything and everything related to mobility, health, fitness, and mindset with the end goal of empowering you with as many tools as possible to take full ownership of your rehab and your overall health. And it's the new year, and so I think it's a perfect time to revisit some concepts that I've gone through in previous videos about how to set realistic goals based on your unique situation, your stroke, your lifestyle, and your stage of recovery. In this video, you are going to learn how to set realistic goals, what the stages of neurologic recovery look like so that you can set realistic expectations, and of course, some examples of what I think good goals are based on your stage of recovery and based on your unique interests, values, and kind of like your intrinsic drive. So we're going to start with a little story, something that happened to me like 6 months ago, probably 6 months ago. I've told this story before, but I was out for a walk, which I do quite frequently. I live in Florida. It was about to start downpouring. In Florida, you know to bring an umbrella with you everywhere. So I had an umbrella in my backpack. I was probably about a half mile from home, and I had a decision to make. Do I pull the umbrella out of my backpack, or do I just get wet and finish my walk home? I decided to be lazy, not take my umbrella out, and just get drenched. Now, why did I make that decision? I looked ahead. I was at the end of my day, so I usually walk in the morning and the afternoon. This was an afternoon walk. I knew I was going to be going home and taking a shower. I didn't really care if I got wet. And again, I was just being lazy and didn't want to take the umbrella out. Now, had it been a morning walk, and this story is relevant, so just bear with me for a minute. Had it been a morning walk and I had just showered and gotten ready for work and I had work clothes on and I was that same distance from the house and I had my umbrella in my backpack, I absolutely would have taken the time to take that umbrella out regardless of how much energy it took me, because I was looking ahead and I knew I had to go to work. I did not have time to go home, take a shower, dry off, all of that, right? I would have made a very different decision. So why do I think that's a relevant story to start with? Because it is absolutely critical that you are aiming, you know where you're going, big picture, and this is going to be different for every single one of you. Where do you foresee yourself being in 6 months from now, a year from now? What would make you proud of you? Those types of things. You have to have that end goal, knowing where you're going, so that you can make the best decisions for you right now. And the energy it would have taken me to take that umbrella out would have seemed like nothing compared to the idea of having to go home and take a shower and blow dry my hair again and do all of that, right? So it makes it easier to do hard things now. A, because I knew the consequences if I didn't, but B, I knew where I was going, right? So that's why I think that this video is the most critical, kind of using that example. If you don't have that end goal, which we're going to go over today, you're really just kind of like just floating in the sea, just being pushed around by the waves and the wind. And I don't want that for you. Let's get down to how you establish that vision of where you're going and how you set realistic goals. And I think it all comes down to starting with an exercise of building some self-awareness. Who are you as a person? What motivates you? What's motivated you in the past? What's motivating you right now? Where do you get your energy from? There are lots of different ways to do this. One is looking at, like, are you intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated? For instance, do you get energy, or are you motivated to do hard things because of that sense of accomplishment and that pride that you will feel when you accomplish that thing? Or are you more motivated by validation from others? Neither one of these are good or bad. It's just good to know who you are and what motivates you. Are you motivated by money? Another example, if you're in school, are you motivated by grades, likes on social media? I don't think either one is good or bad. I think it's just good to know what camp you're in. And currently, why are you working on the things that you're working on? I think extrinsic motivating factors are probably good to kind of get started, to initiate doing hard things. And I think intrinsic motivating factors are really good to persevere and kind of keep you engaged in something for the long haul. But just good to know what's motivating you right now. How do you get your energy? Write it down. And then the other thing I think is good to write down are your values. Knowing what your values are, it's much easier if your goals are attached to something that is a value of yours, because it really does help you to be able to get through the difficult times. But also when you get off course, if you can come back to your values for your life, it does help you to kind of get back on course, because there are going to be little deviations and you need kind of that North Star. So there are hundreds of different values. If you've never done this, just Google search what are like life values, work values, whatever. You'll find lists and lists and lists. I did a Google search. I found a little list. And some of the ones that I pulled off of the list are some ambition is a value, like just pursuing something challenging. Some people really find value in that. If that's you, just know that you're probably going to need to keep setting goals. And every time you accomplish something, you know, you're fulfilling that need in your life, caring for others. If your role has changed in your family, but you always felt like fulfilled when you were caring for someone else, that would definitely determine or be good to know when you're establishing your goals. Maybe one of your goals needs to be being able to like empty the dishwasher for your spouse, or be able to feed yourself or cook your own meals or something to that degree to take the burden off your spouse. And then above and beyond that, doing things for your spouse, maybe being able to open the door for them, or, you know, make them a meal once in a while, things like that. So if that's you and you know that that's giving you a lot of fulfillment in your life, caring for other people, then that's good to know. And I would write that down. If you like change, you're probably someone that travels a lot. You like new experiences. If that's you, that's good to write that down, because maybe you can't go on those international vacations anymore, but maybe you do need to plan little like mini staycations where you don't really need to get on a plane, because that is fulfilling to you. Remember, this all comes back to that very first line that I said at the beginning. I'm not sure if many of you caught that, but we're creating a plan that improves your overall quality of life. So knowing what your values are extremely valuable in setting goals that are important to you. Family is another value. So if you really enjoy spending time with family, maybe it doesn't matter how you get somewhere, whether you're walking or in a wheelchair, but maybe you just want to be able to get to those family events to be able to spend time with family. And that's really important information to know before you start setting goals. Freedom is a value, being independent. I know that this is a value for many, many people. I can see the pride on some people's faces when maybe they were in an assisted living and now they're living on their own. I can only speculate that freedom and independence is a very important value to them based on just what they look like when they're telling me this huge accomplishment of being able to get out of an assisted living and get back to living at home. If that's really important to you, maybe, and there's a little bit of teaser about what we're going to talk about, you know, quality movement might not necessarily be as important as just being able to do the things that you need to do to be independent. Another value is self-improvement. Maybe you just really like growing and feeling like you're becoming better as a human. That's really important to know, because maybe like a big goal at the end isn't as like meaningful to you as maybe the habits you're developing day to day. And again, that's a little bit of a teaser about what we're going to go into today a little bit. And then wealth. Some people really get validation, or they really find value and they get excited and fulfilled when the numbers on their bank account are going up. And if that's you, that's not a bad thing. I would just acknowledge it, write it down. Maybe if you can't go back to your previous job, it's finding some way to earn an income doing something that you enjoy. And you want to attach a goal to that, because that is meaningful to you, and you will be better able to endure and persevere through the difficult times. So far we've talked about motivating factors, intrinsic versus extrinsic, and going through and figuring out what are your values. I think that is absolutely foundational before we get into setting goals. And then big picture, I've said the word a few times already, is The main goal is improving your quality of life. So, what is quality of life? Quality of life is the degree to which an individual is healthy, comfortable, and able to participate in or enjoy life events. So, what in 6 months or a year from now would improve that? Your enjoyment, I'm pulling out the phrase that I think is the most meaningful, your enjoyment in participation in life events. I think that does come back to your values. Is this spending time with family and friends? Is this taking care of someone? Whatever that thing may be that is fulfilling to you, your quality of life is what is, we know that is most important. And when your quality of life is high, it's a lot easier to do the hard things that you're going to have to do to achieve some of the goals that we're going to be going over today. So quality of life, super important. I would build all of your goals around this idea of what skills or tasks would improve your overall quality of life. And then there are two camps of people, and I think it's really good to know what camp you fall into. There are the people that are absolutely 100% okay with compensating. What is compensation? Compensation is something that our brain will just automatically do after damage to one side of our brain. When we have damage on one side of our brain, the side of the brain that's not damaged will send over some resources and take over for that damaged area. What does this look like for you? That for those of you that have gone through this process, is that sometimes I will ask someone to do something with their weak arm or their involved hand, and they will be doing it with their other hand and not really realizing it. So that's a perfect example of like compensation. And compensation is not bad. I want to be crystal clear on this. I know I talk a lot about quality movement, and that's because you don't really have to teach someone how to compensate. They'll just automatically do it. And there's less emphasis in traditional physical therapy on the quality movement side. So that's why a lot of my videos focus on that. But I want to be perfectly clear. I have just as many people who do not care that they are compensating. They just want that high quality of life. They just want to be able to participate in those life events, and they really don't care what it looks like. And sometimes I almost think that their quality of life is actually better because they've accepted where they're at and they're okay with like not looking normal, and they're out there enjoying life. So that is one group of people. It's just good to know what group you fall into. And then I have another on the opposite extreme of people that just want to look normal. They want to restore normal movement. I don't think either camp is good or bad. And I do think you can set good goals that are going to make you proud of you, regardless of what camp you're in. It's just good to know what camp you're in, especially when we get to goal setting. It's going to be important to know which of those two groups you fall into, so that you're setting goals that are unique and specific to you and will be meaningful to you. Okay, so if you're in the compensation group, just know that your goals are going to be more related to like a functional activity, being able to get into a car so that you can go out to eat with your friends, being able to cook a meal for your spouse, something very big picture. You don't really need to worry about whether or not you do it with your involved hand or your uninvolved hand. But then there's that other camp, and I'll call this like the quality movement camp of people, or neuroplasticity. Now, if you're going to be in this other group, the thing you have to adopt or really believe, and it is true, but you really have to believe it and not doubt it, is that neuroplasticity is possible after a neurologic injury. So I know what a lot of you have been told, that neuroplasticity does not occur in adults, or that it doesn't occur after 18 months, or some of you have been told after 6 months this doesn't occur. I will just tell you from personal experience, that's not true. I will say for some people, depending on where their stroke is in their brain, that is true, but there's a lot of people that does not apply. And if you are someone that's going to want to restore normal movement, you just have to believe that. If you don't believe that, you are going to be frustrated. Just take my word for it. I work with some of you. You are going to be frustrated because you're going to doubt, like, is this exercise doing anything? Right? And if the exercise is hard and it's repetitive, which we'll get into, that's very, very important, is repetition. You're not going to be able to endure for the long haul if at the foundation you don't believe that you can rewire your brain. So let's stick in this neuroplasticity group for a minute here. So what is neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity is the process by which your brain rewires in response to new experiences. It's driven by behavior, sensory, and cognitive experiences. So what does that mean? If you want to improve your thinking, memory, problem solving, safety, you want to decrease your impulsiveness, you have to be presented with opportunities where you have to work on that area. So what does that mean? You have to be given some freedom to, within reason, do things that force you to have to think without relying on a caregiver to give you all the answers for something in a safe manner. Now, this is where physical therapy is extremely valuable because we can assess where you're at and we can present you with challenges that are reasonable and safe, but still will force you to have to think and problem solve and reason and figure out a plan for a specific activity and allowing you to do that on your own. Very, very hard if you have very loving caregivers. But that part, those cognitive abilities will not improve if you're not presented with some sort of an activity that challenges those areas. Same with sensory experiences and movement experiences. Now, what is all of this? All of this is what we call learning. Learning is the key word when it comes to you setting up your goals and being able to stick with them for the long haul. You are not strengthening a muscle. You are trying to learn. So think about kids in school. You don't just go to school for an hour, 3 times a week for a year. You go to school every day for 5 to 7 hours for 12 years. Why is that? It's because you are learning. Why is that important? Going to physical therapy once a week, twice a week for 30, 45 minutes is not going to cut it. That's why I spend so much time on this channel, just giving you all the tools so that you can kind of become your own therapist outside of therapy. And you have all the tools to be able to do physical therapy every single day. So if you're in this neuroplasticity camp, you are in the learning process. Very, very important. So what does that mean? It means we do need to understand the learning process a little bit. So when we are learning a motor skill, there are stages in that motor learning process. First, we have to understand what the skill is. What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to reach for a cup? Are we trying to clean a table? What is the movement? What is the skill we're trying to do? Having an understanding of that. And I think that gets lost sometimes when you're going to physical therapy too much because the physical therapist is kind of feeding you all that information. But it is good for you to be able to sit and think, why am I doing this? And what does this movement look like? What are all the components of this movement? Right? That's the foundation of learning. If you don't have that understanding of what you're actually trying to do, as in what direction are you trying to move that limb, it's very hard to learn, meaning going through the next stages in the learning process. Then there's kind of like an acquisition phase of that skill. And during this acquisition phase, you are getting a lot of feedback, or ideally, you're getting a lot of feedback. There's another set of eyes on you, or kind of like the coach. Think back to when you were in sports. That's kind of making a lot of corrections. And then eventually you kind of learn what those errors are that you're making and how to make those corrections on your own. Remember, this is everything you're going through with every new movement that you learn. There's a lot of time and repetition that is required in that acquisition phase. You're getting feedback, maybe from a therapist. They're kind of pointing out some of your errors, but when they're pointing out those errors, what I really hope you're doing is what did that error feel like, so that the next time it happens, I can recognize that error and I can remember how that therapist told me to correct it, and I can correct it on my own. Very, very important. A lot of you are going to spend a lot of time in this phase, and then it is beyond that phase that it is actually automatized, meaning that you can actually now do it without thinking about it. So that acquisition phase, there's a lot of thinking required. So what's important in that phase? You don't have a lot of stimulation going on around you, but also that you know your head is going to hurt. And I say that as a joke, but that's usually what I tell people. If your head isn't hurting, you're not thinking, you're probably not doing it right, because that's how much cognitive load it takes. The example I always use is, remember when you learned this as a kid, like how much energy that took for you to do that? That's kind of what it's like with every single movement. Now, why is that important? Because some of you are in that phase in therapy, and then you leave therapy and you go out and you try these things on your own. You just expect it's going to happen, and then it doesn't happen and you get really frustrated. That means that you just haven't learned it yet. So when you leave therapy and you're maybe like unsuccessful at that skill, it just means you need to go back and really sit in a quiet environment, try the movement again, figure out why it's not going right, feel what your body is doing, and see if you can kind of make some of those corrections on your own. And then after that automation, meaning now you can do that movement without thinking about it, then can you generalize that movement to other scenarios and situations? Now, why is this phase in the learning process really important? Because some of you do these things in therapy, and then you go to a restaurant and now there's chairs in your way, or you've got to get to the bathroom and it's a crowded environment. You got to navigate through people, or you got to go over cobblestone to get into the restaurant. Well, then you get frustrated, and everything that you learned in therapy seems like it was all for naught, because now you can't put any of those skills into practice. It is because maybe you haven't gotten to that phase where you've generalized yet. So what does that mean? It just means that you have to give yourself some grace when you're back at home in a controlled environment. Just means you got to put more reps in. So that's all it means. But I think the takeaway for this is just the most important thing is to know that you are in the learning process, and you have to understand that so that you're not getting frustrated and expecting that you're going to be able to do things in different situations or different scenarios or with more stimulation, and that you're going to be able to perform exactly the same as when you're in a controlled environment. It's going to be completely different. And if you're not in that phase of the learning process yet, then don't set that expectation that you're going to be able to do that perfect movement in those environments. Okay. And I promise you, all of this does relate to goals, but it's absolutely important to understand before you even start setting goals, knowing kind of where you're at in that learning process. But then there's one other kind of stage system that we need to understand before we start setting goals. And that is, what are the stages of motor recovery? Now, this is just one kind of camp of thought, but based on my experience and what I see clinically every day, it's the one that makes the most sense to me. And some believe that after a stroke, there are 5 or 6 stages of recovery. The first stage is flaccid, meaning no movement. You have a dead arm and a dead leg. Now, everyone's going to move through these stages at a little bit of a different pace, just based on how quickly you got to the hospital. Did you get TPA? Did you have a clot or a bleed? How big was it? Everyone's going to go through these stages at a little bit of a different pace, but pretty much everyone starts out flaccid. They can't move the extremity. It looks dead. Then you start to get a little bit of tone. And by tone, we just mean the muscles are contracting a little bit, but you're moving in patterns. Now, I've talked about this quite a bit, especially in recent videos, but if you're new to this channel, I do think it's important to know, and I use this example a lot. It's just like babies. If you notice that when they are infants, they kind of move in these gross patterns. They're either all flexion, all extension. This belief system, or there's a camp of people that believe we go through this same phase when we are recovering from a neurologic injury, or after a neurologic injury, we go through a phase where we're moving in patterns again, kind of like we're going through the redevelopment phases. So we call these synergy patterns. There's a flexor synergy pattern and an extensor synergy pattern. The good news about this is it means you're going from a dead limb to now you're getting some tone. Okay, so not necessarily a bad thing, but the other thing that happens during this phase, coming out of the flaccid phase, is you also get what we call spasticity. These are just involuntary muscle contractions, different than abnormal synergy patterns, but they usually both occur at the same time. Again, not necessarily a bad thing because it means that your arm wasn't moving at all and you had no tone, and now you're getting a little bit of a contraction, even though it is from a pattern that's just kind of hardwired in our brain. Spasticity, we don't fully understand all the mechanisms as to why this occurs, but it usually occurs in someone that's had damage to a motor area of the brain. And again, it's an involuntary muscle contraction, and it's what we call velocity dependent. So it taps into something that we call like the stretch reflex that's in every muscle. And when that stretch reflex is kind of triggered, it will cause like a recoil contraction. And that is spasticity. It's velocity dependent, meaning the faster a muscle is lengthened, usually the stronger that contraction is. That's important to know, especially for those of you that are stretching, or if you're a caregiver and you're helping someone get dressed, that you want to make sure you move the limbs slow. That spasticity, again, is good because now someone went from not having any tone to now having a little bit of tone. We just don't want that to become the dominant movement, because if spasticity is left to just go to town, what eventually happens is you develop what we call like adaptive shortening or contractures. So if spasticity is just left to do its thing all the time, that muscle stays shortened for prolonged periods of time, and you develop what we call a contracture. But again, we're just kind of going through the stages of recovery, kind of keep a mental note of where you think you are at. And then the next stage, that spasticity and those synergy patterns, they get a little bit stronger. And that's where a lot of you are that's where you're at. That's where I would say most of you kind of get stuck in that phase, or that's where you're at right now. The phase after that is moving out of synergy patterns. So synergy patterns are multiple joints link up together, all flexion or all extension. All the joints in the arm link up together. If any of you are experiencing this, you know what I'm talking about, and I don't really need to explain it. Out of synergy patterns is being able to isolate each joint. So can you move your shoulder without your arm drawing up and in? Can you extend your elbow without your arm going down and being glued to your side? So one out of synergy movement is extending your elbow with your arm overhead. So those would be what the next phase of the neurologic recovery process is, and extremely important to know what phase you're in so that you know what types of goals you need to set to kind of work towards the next phase. If you're in the flaccid phase, using synergy patterns and using your spasticity a little bit, not necessarily a bad thing, just to start initiating some sort of a movement in that arm, in my opinion. There are therapists out there that would probably disagree with that, but I use it. I will use a little quick stretch to maybe tap into that spasticity a little bit. So I'll actually intentionally kind of quickly lengthen a muscle, trying to get some of that contraction. So again, just my opinion, but that's something you would do if you're kind of in that flaccid stage to kind of start kind of getting some tone in that arm. Now, if you're high tone and you're in this kind of like 3-4 phase and you're getting so much tone that it's interfering with movement and you're starting to develop some contractures, then you definitely would want to start blocking some of those arm joints so that like elbow can't bend, right? I talk about this quite a bit on this channel. I love air splints. I will put a link for air splints in the description below. But if any of you are new to this channel, just in the YouTube search bar, type in Rehab HQ and arm spasticity, and you'll get to a lot of videos where I talk about how to come out of these spastic patterns. But again, we're just setting goals. So we're trying to figure out where are you at in the recovery process and what types of goals are realistic for you based on where you're at. Okay, and now that we're moving out of those spastic patterns, we're going to kind of keep with this baby example. Now, picture that baby that was all flexion, all extension, all flexion, and just kind of rolling back to, back to stomach. Or they were trying to crawl across the floor and they're just kind of like flexion, extension, and just kind of by chance, they're scooting across the floor and everyone gets really excited. But they're not actually moving out of synergy patterns until they start crawling and eventually walking. Those would be out of synergy patterns. So why is this important to know? Because we use a lot of these, like what we call developmental skills or exercises in stroke recovery as well. They're great activities. One of the easiest ones to do, even if you're like what we call like really low level, meaning you can't do a lot of movement on your own, is just getting on your stomach and getting on your elbows, just like you see babies do, working on lifting their head, right? So that'd be something you would do if you're in the very early stages and you're very low tone. If you're more high tone and maybe you're walking and you're noticing that your leg is just locking out an extension, I've talked about this a lot on this video, then your goals would be more like getting into quadruped, getting into kneeling, getting into half kneeling, things like that. So knowing where you're at in the recovery process and setting up your goals based on your goals, making sure you're choosing exercises. So for instance, if your goal is to walk with normal movement, making sure that you're choosing exercises that might be tapping into these developmental activities or sequences would be extremely beneficial. And then of course, the last stage of movement is full motor coordination. You can move all limbs independently of each other. Nothing is really linked up. You can jump, you can skip, you can hop. Ideally, you don't have any involuntary muscle contractions. Now, I will say, and I've said this in a few videos in the past recently, is that I don't think spasticity ever goes away completely. So why do I tell you that? In my experience, I've never seen anyone, even someone that's had like a minor stroke, if they had spasticity at some point, that there isn't still that little hum of spasticity in the background. And I think that if you don't pay a little bit of attention to it, that hum gets louder and louder, maybe around like the 5 or the 10-year mark. And again, this is just based on my experience. So I don't think you can ever just assume that spasticity has gone away completely. So maybe if you're someone that you're in a really heavy plastic AFO at some point, and then a therapist, said that your tone is decreasing and you don't need that AFO anymore, I would never throw that AFO away. The leg is where I see this happen the most, where someone will come in, they say, yeah, I haven't worn my brace in 3 years because my movement was coming back, and then spasticity will just slowly creep in and it'll start interfering with your ability to walk. Your knee will start possibly going into hyperextension. You don't really notice it too much, and then it just kind of gets worse and worse. So my suggestion is don't ever throw those braces away, even though maybe you're getting into the stage where you have full coordination with no spasticity. I personally, just in my experience, don't think that spasticity ever goes away completely. And there may be situations where either you have to go back to your orthotist and get another brace made, or just keep your brace and occasionally put it on, maybe when you're in more stimulating environments, which is where spasticity would usually be a little bit like stronger. And then maybe you just still don't wear the brace when you're in a more controlled environment like your home. So now that we have all of that out of the way, hopefully that gives you a little bit more structure or like an idea of, okay, where am I at and what do I need to do to move forward? And now we're going to go back to a little bit of self-reflection. And basically what I'm going to do now is kind of take you through like what we as therapists, where our curiosities go when we are helping someone develop goals. What are the questions that we're trying to get answers to? The first one we've already covered in depth. Question I start with everyone is, what would make you fulfilled in your life 6 months or a year from now? I ask every single patient that. That is absolutely the foundation. There is no right or wrong answer, but you should be able to answer that question for yourself before you start setting goals. Next is, what are you able to do? What are your strengths? We're going to go through strengths and weaknesses. What are your strong points? And here's the one strong point that I don't think gets enough attention that should get more attention. I know that I try and highlight on it. What did you do for a living? Were you an accountant? Are you really good at numbers? Were you an engineer? Are you really good at understanding vectors and physics? That is a huge strength that you can really use. The human body, we're just a structure. We're just if you're in construction, I tell people that their job, they were in construction, we're just a build. Your body's just a building. Just think of it like a building. All the, your hips, everything that goes this way, your shoulders, those are all just floors in the building. If you can kind of visualize it like that, then you can create your program based on your understanding of how physics works if you're an engineer, or how structures need to be balanced to help you figure out what are the best exercises. So I like to know things like that, but also what's your problem solving skill? What are your problem solving skills like? Can you think outside the box? What movements are you doing really well? If you're compensating really well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It means you probably have had 0 falls. Maybe you're really careful. That's good to know about you, because that means that like you can challenge yourself a little bit more because you have good safety awareness. So that's very good to know. How much are you moving your arm? I wouldn't focus on like the arm doesn't move. I'd focus on like, oh, I can move it like 45 degrees away from my arm. Write all of these things down. Every little thing about how you think, how you reason, what your arm movement is like, what your leg movement is like. Can you step into a shower? Can you get into a car and lift that leg? When you get in and out of bed, are you able to lift that leg up? All super important, as well as like your emotional strengths, right? Are you really good at like facing a challenge or something that you're not doing well and really taking ownership of it? Well, you want to capitalize on that, because that is a huge strength. I will tell you, a lot of people I work with do not have that as a strength, but when I get those people, they seem to do really well because they can kind of persevere and get through those challenging times. But that's good. Write that down if that's a strength of yours. If it's not, don't write it down, because next what we're going to get into are what are your weaknesses. And this is where I think people really don't spend enough time. I think it's just human nature to not want to face what we're not doing well. But if you don't know this, then you're not going to really you're not going to be able to set realistic expectations for yourself, and you're going to get frustrated. So do you have issues with safety? Are you a little bit impulsive? Do you have neglect? Do you have poor midline awareness? Like when a family member tells you you're straight and you feel like you're tipping over, that's important to know. Are you depressed? Are you angry? Do you feel like giving up? It's just important to write these things down. Other things more related to physical. Do you struggle with fatigue? Can you move your arm part way, but you can't move it all the way? Right? Can you stand on your leg, but your knee goes into hyperextension? When you walk, is your foot dragging? Does it drag 1 out of 5 steps, or does it drag 5 out of 5 steps? Write all of these things down of things that you think are challenges or potential barriers. If you're a caregiver, these are really important. Is your loved one, do they have a lot of apathy? That is part of their stroke, and it's important to just be aware of that so that you're not setting unrealistic expectations. Do they have neglect? Are they impulsive? Do they have cognitive deficits? These are important, because if you give them too much, if you expect them to have normal movement and they are just trying to be able to stay focused to one activity or one thought at a time, that is extremely frustrating for all parties involved. So again, that's why this strengths and weaknesses lists are very, very important, not just for patients, but also for caregivers. And then also knowing what your support system looks like. Do you have friends? Do you have someone at the gym that can help you? Do you have family members that can help you with your exercises? List out every kind of support resource that you have so that you know that when you're going to set your goals, any barriers or things that you might not be able to do on your own, you're like, oh yeah, but when I go to the gym, there's always that trainer that always asks how I'm doing, and maybe they can get that Bosu ball out for me, or, maybe they can set up the leg press machine for me or help me get on it, things like that. Think about every single potential support resource that you might have in your life, and definitely think outside the box and know that most humans get fulfillment out of helping other humans. So if you have anyone in your life that has the time or has the skill or the ability to help you, write it down. Now we're going to get into the controversial part, and this next part is goals versus habits. Now, I'm definitely more of a habits person, so just important to know, I don't necessarily love focusing on a goal every single day after I've established it. So I like setting the goal, but goals sometimes in the day-to-day, and this is just me, you just have to know yourself, is a little overwhelming. Sometimes it gets me a little overwhelmed. I am a much bigger fan of finding the habits and doing the habits consistently every single day. I think for some people, not all, some people really like that number and striving for that end goal. But for some people, just being able to get up, show up, do something that moves the needle in a positive direction every single day, in my opinion, it gives you more life satisfaction because you're not constantly looking at this end goal and thinking like what you're not able to do. And again, could be just me projecting on a lot of you. So just know yourself. I have pretty good self-awareness in this area, but I'm very fulfilled when I am just doing something every single day that's moving me closer to that goal. And then occasionally I will make sure that I'm still on target. And that's when that goal becomes valuable. So before you even set goals, just know, are you a habits person or are you a goals person? And know what overwhelms you and what kind of gives you that life fulfillment, and make sure you set those goals appropriately and you focus on them with the appropriate amount of energy. So now if you're a goals person, we are going to talk about SMART goals for just a minute. So what are SMART goals? Goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and they're time-based. Okay, so specific is really important. So a lot of times people just tell me when I ask them what their goal is, they say, I just want to walk normal, or I just want to be able to walk again, or I just want my arm to move again. That's not very specific. I think you have to get more specific than that. And also make sure it is for some of you, remember, some of you just are going to set your goals and then you're going to move on and not go back and measure them too often. But occasionally, like having a measurable goal that is very specific is important so that you know that the exercises you're doing are in some way moving the needle towards that goal. So if you're trying to get arm movement and you're not moving your arm at all, your goal might just be to have a little line on your table that it's a certain distance away from the edge of the table, and you're just trying to reach that line for now. That's measurable. And it's specific. If you're trying to get external rotation, because you know you're getting a lot of that spasticity, and now you're trying to isolate movement, external rotation is an out of synergy movement. Your goal would be to set your arm on the table and try and move it towards a line on your table, something that you can, something that's measurable. Maybe you can create like a piece of cardboard and you can put lines all the way on it. And each time you're trying to get to a line that's further and further across that cardboard. If your goal is to walk without dragging your foot, how many steps in a row do you want to be able to take without your foot touching the ground? If your knee's going into recurvatum, how many steps in a row do you want to be able to take without your knee going into recurvatum? If you're more in the camp of just compensation and you know that you lose your balance every time you're in public when you have to like turn your head, how many feet do you want to be able to walk turning your head without deviating from a straight line? Things like that. If you stand in the corner, how long do you want to be able to stand in the corner moving your head side to side without losing your balance? These are all videos that are here on YouTube. So when you're going through these videos, when you're setting your goals, just go to the YouTube search bar, type in the specific problem that you're having or that you're trying to solve for, and put and Rehab HQ, and you will get to the videos that will have exercises in it for that specific thing. But as far as setting that long-term goal, something that's achievable now that would play into building your confidence and not falling in public, which isn't really measurable, would be something like, can I walk 150 feet and turn my head side to side and not deviate from a straight path? Potentially. And then, of course, making sure it's something that's achievable. So if you're in stage 1 of those stages of motor recovery, maybe your goal is just that you get some tone. You just get that arm to move. a little bit, right? So making sure that you're making that goal achievable and that it's relevant. And that comes all the way back to your values and your overall quality of life. Making sure that it is relevant to those things is extremely important. And then set a time frame. 6 months from now, what would make you happy? And what I think a 6-month goal is actually a good goal for a movement specific type of goal. Because with that, you're going through that entire learning process, right? The tons of feedback, lots of thinking, getting it so that it's automatic, and then being able to carry that over into other situations. Very important. So now, just to recap a little bit, SMART goals are extremely valuable for some people. You just have to know yourself. And based on that self-awareness, sometimes it's better just to set those goals to be able to have a North Star, have a place that you are going, and then kind of forget about them a little bit and focus more on those daily habits. Now, a little bit more about those daily habits. I could not make a video as kind of like a jump start to 2025 when a lot of people set some kind of New Year's resolutions without at least referencing a little bit the stack that I talked about in a videos a few weeks back, which is a stack of habits that I think are absolutely the foundation to neurologic recovery. Now, I'm going to link that video in the description below where I go into kind of what's going on behind the scenes inside your brain and your body after a stroke. One of the big takeaways from that video that we know is that a stroke can cause what we call chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation kind of sets off a cascade of processes going on inside of your body that are suboptimal for neural rewiring. Now, why do I tell you all of that? It's because most of you are probably going to pick a task-specific goal, which I think is absolutely essential because remember, we talked about what improves your quality of life, and that's being able to participate in the activities that you enjoy. And yes, that means being able to do something functionally that maybe you lost due to your stroke. But more importantly than that, in my opinion, is having a set of daily habits that are creating the right internal environment for you to be able to learn these tasks. And what are those things? Mental well-being, nutrition, movement, and sleep. Absolutely need to address those 4 things in order to make sure that you're not going to get discouraged or set yourself up to expect a certain outcome when really you don't have the internal environment to support that neural rewiring that is required. So very briefly, I'm going to give like a 10-second recap of that video. The foundation of your day really needs to be starting from a place where you are minding your mind. In other words, your mental well-being. For most of you, where I see the biggest barrier in this is hanging on to anger and resentment and regret and all of these things because you're in a situation that maybe you didn't expect or plan for. And really, it all starts with going through the grieving process, grieving that you have lost a component of your life and getting to a point of acceptance. Again, easy for me to say, I'm sure much harder to do, but I'm just telling you what I've observed from different personalities and people that are in the different phases of that grief process and how dramatically different their motivation is, their joy is, and their actual physical recovery. So the base of that is mental well-being. Having some habit where you're addressing that. I like to spend about 10 minutes of silence per day. Sometimes we don't even realize I hate to use kind of like a cliche word, but how toxic our mind is or the things that we're telling ourselves. So spending that time just kind of allowing yourself to think and think about your thinking as well as every day having 1 to 3 things that you write down that you are grateful for. That's at a minimum. Of course, I'm a huge advocate of getting help from a professional. I've done it periodically throughout my life, so this is just a personal testimony that it absolutely will help you to optimize all areas of your life, especially if you're not someone who has ever done anything like this before or really thought about your thoughts. Professionals really know how to kind of pull that out of you. Next here is obviously nutrition. This is a very controversial topic. The thing that is incontrovertible, I guess is the word, is to eliminate processed foods. I don't think anyone disagrees that there's nothing good about that. But if you watch that video that I did on the brain healing habits, I went into kind of like what's going on inside the neurons in your brain. Mitochondria is extremely critical to that. Mitochondria are the energy producers in our cells. Energy is required to deploy those neurotransmitters that allow, which are chemicals that allow neurons to communicate with each other. If you do not have optimized mitochondria, it does become more challenging because you don't have as much energy to work with. So we know that processed foods, as well as some lifestyle things that I go into in that video as well, do contribute to that. They make your mitochondria just like a little bit less efficient. Some mitochondria outlive kind of their stay. Mitochondria have a shelf life. There's a whole lot of things that I went into in there, but they're absolutely critical to producing that energy. And if you are not at least in the process of trying to eliminate ultra processed foods and trying not to eat out as much as possible, I recommend that you go down the route of allowing the compensation because there's less learning that's required. Remember, we don't really need to learn how to compensate and just get those skills back because you're already at a disadvantage because you're an adult as far as that neural rewiring to recreate those neural pathways. It can happen. My experience tells me that it can. So if you choose to go down that route, just know that you're at a disadvantage because of your age and you need everything internally to be optimized so that you can create those new neural networks. So if you want to go down the neuroplasticity pathway and relearn new movements and get that neural rewiring, you have to have this kind of stack in order. You at least have to be somewhat addressing some of these issues. The nutrition layer of that is eliminate ultra processed foods, get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day, drink a glass of water with each meal, a glass of water in between each meal, and try and eat fiber with every meal as well. That's it. Anything outside of that, keto, carnivore, Mediterranean, vegetarian, there are debates on all sides and they all have compelling arguments. But those things that I just said, I don't think anyone disagrees with, except for the carnivores, maybe, as far as the fiber. But that is essential. If you do that, you are setting yourself up in a much better position to get that neural rewiring. Next on top of that is movement, activity. Contracting and relaxing your muscles multiple times a day is absolutely essential. So why do I give you that definition of movement is just contracting and relaxing muscles? Some of you can't walk. Ideally, I think walking is probably the most beneficial way to get that extra activity in. But some of you can't do that. And what we know is it's just the act. The reason walking improves so many, health metrics or health outcomes is the contracting and relaxing of skeletal muscles. So what does that mean for you? Get in a pool and kick. Propel your wheelchair around. If your feet don't touch the ground in your wheelchair, look at your wheelchair where those wheels connect to the wheelchair. A lot of times there's 2 holes. Many people might not know this. There's 2 holes on your wheelchair frame. The top hole is if you put the wheels in that hole, the axle in that hole, then it lowers the wheelchair. We call that a hemi-height wheelchair. That is intended so that your feet can reach the ground so that you can foot propel. So hemi-height, because most people don't have use of 1 arm and 1 leg, that means they can foot propel and kind of steer with 1 arm, right? If you just foot propelled, you go around in a circle. Anyone that's in a wheelchair has already figured this out. So you need kind of a combination of that. I mean, if you just did the wheel, you would go around in a circle, but many of you know, you need that combination of being able to propel the wheel and use your foot to kind of keep the chair straight. So if it's not in that hemi-height position, move your wheels or take it to someone who can do that for you to move those wheels into that upper hole, and it'll lower that seat height. Downside of that is it's harder to get in and out of that chair, but I think it's worth the trade-off. If you can still do it, get in and out of that chair from that lower height, I totally think it's worth the trade-off. So move. Any bit of movement every single day as possible is beneficial, whether that's 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. The goal would be try and get up to 45 minutes, 5 to 7 times a week. But if you're just starting out and you've been sitting in your wheelchair or just like sitting in front of the TV for a year or more, then 3 minutes a day is absolutely going to make a difference. I promise you. So start small with something that you can actually do consistently and that you don't hate. And then on top of that is the sleep. Again, this is an entire video that I'm really condensing down, hopefully into less than a couple of minutes, but 7 to 9 hours of time in bed, with the exception of getting up to go to the bathroom, to minimize the amount of times you have to get up to go to the bathroom. Stop drinking 3 hours before you go to bed. If you really want to optimize your sleep and get good quality sleep, make sure the room is dark, make sure the room is cold, about 68 degrees, I think is what the experts say, and quiet, or as quiet as possible. Once you're at least addressing all of those and optimizing your internal environment, do I think maybe at that point, should you start thinking about retraining an arm that doesn't move or a leg that doesn't move? And I know that's going to be upsetting to some of you, but I'm just trying to set you up for success and not for you to be disappointed a year from now if all these other areas are all out of whack and you're still not learning anything new. Okay. So definitely those habits are absolutely essential. But then the other big takeaway message is that I think once you set that goal, the habit for movement retraining should be every single day, 7 days a week, first thing in the morning and right before you go to bed. There is evidence that suggests that sleeping helps to consolidate memories when you're learning certain types of information. So that's why I think doing it and then going and getting a good night's sleep is important. But then also most of you are much fresher in the morning. So doing a little bit in the morning when you might be a little bit fresher. And then there is some evidence in like the learning world that doing something and then taking a break and thinking about something else and then doing it again also helps to kind of consolidate whatever that thing is that you're trying to learn. So that's why I say, if you can, break it up a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the afternoon, every single day if possible. Now, if you're falling off the rehab train and you're just getting back on, I would say still do twice a day, but do smaller amounts, maybe 3 to 5 minutes in the morning and 3 to 5 minutes in the afternoon to create the habit. Do that for 3 months and then start adding on time. Remember, the habit is way more important, in my opinion, than the actual goal. Being consistent, you will start to feel like a new person. You'll start to feel more empowered, just knowing that you are the type of person that can stick to something consistently for an extended period of time. That's why I say lower your expectations of what you are capable of. I guess that's the best way to say it. I think that is the most effective way for certain personalities. My personality, for one, is just lower your expectations of what you're capable of, and then you will oftentimes exceed your expectations, and it'll give you the energy to be in the motivation to be able to go in and set bigger goals. So that would be my suggestion if you're going to go down this road of movement retraining. And then what type of goals should you set? If you are in that neuroplasticity goal, I've touched on it a few times, but just to be a little bit more concrete, if your goal is to be able to do your hair, that's great. That's a big picture goal. Now take that goal and break it down into its smallest components. I'm just giving you one example, and hopefully you guys can apply this framework to whatever your task is that you want to restore, but break it down. What do you need to be able to do? You need to be able to hold a brush. You need to be able to lift your arm. right? If you can't lift your arm against gravity, I have tons of videos on this. This is not a video on breaking down a movement pattern because I do that all year long. This is kind of taking all of those and being able to use this as a framework and then go back to those videos. But if you can't do it against gravity, lay down. That's less gravity. So, and try and bringing your arm up, right? So one component of that is bringing your arm up. The other component of that is being able to hold on to a brush. So in my experience or my opinion, I would break those two things up and work them separately. So when you're working on the holding the brush, make sure your elbow is supported and hold the brush. The other component, and I've talked about this recently in a lot of videos, is figuring in those barriers that we talked about at the very beginning. While you're creating this plan, okay, that works, but I have a lot of spasticity and I have a lot of tightness. So that should trigger you when you're breaking this skill down that you need to make sure that you stretch before you do that. And I have videos on that. So just search arm spasticity and Rehab HQ and you'll get to stretches and exercises for that. And then what are some other barriers that could potentially set you back or set you up to not be as successful at reaching that goal? Do you get distracted really easily? Okay, well, I need reminders on my phone and then I need to make sure I'm in a quiet place. Do you procrastinate? Okay, well, then I need to make sure I'm in my home. Or do you forget altogether? Okay, well, do I have a friend or a family member that could maybe help and just be my accountability person? That's why you want to write down everything we went through at the beginning, because now is when you kind of go back to that list and you really need to make sure that you've addressed all of those barriers so that you're setting yourself up for success. That is it for this video. I hope all of that made sense to all of you. Now, if you are in this place where you are ready to take on 2025 and get new movement, but you feel a little lost at going to YouTube and going to our channel and navigating all of the videos that have tons of exercises in each video, I think you would really like our membership program. Our membership program includes a software that I spent a lot of time building and continue to add to. It's the home exercises that I give to my patients that I see in person. You have full access to that vault, that entire vault, where you can drag and drop exercises and create your own program. And then every time you log in, your program is there. Why is that important? It helps you to not get distracted. You have your set of exercises. You don't have to go through tons of YouTube videos and waste a ton of time kind of pulling the one or two exercises out of the videos here on YouTube. The other nice thing about that is you can print your own handout. So once you create your program, you can print your own handout, and then you don't even have to get on any devices at all, which will help with some of you from getting distracted. And you can just take that sheet of paper to your workout area, leave it in there, and then you have those set exercises for a certain amount of time. I think you should stick with a certain group of exercises for no less than a month if you want it to be successful, instead of continuing to hop around. And then in addition, if you are a gold member, you also will get access to monthly Q&As where you can ask questions specific to your goal. And many times I will go through the vault during that live session and we will kind of create that program together. And then we also do webinars where we do touch on like the nutrition and lifestyle, but also breaking down movement patterns, kind of going through a step-by-step process. And usually that is from member feedback as to the things that they're struggling with. Those webinars are usually built around that. So if you're really serious about taking your rehab to the next level and ending 2025 feeling absolutely proud of yourself and empowered and motivated to set even bigger goals because you will accomplish so much this year, then definitely check out our membership program. You can visit www.rehab-hq.com to learn more about all of our memberships. But that is it for this video. If you made it all the way to the end, you're going to accomplish huge things in 2025, because this was probably the longest video I've ever made on YouTube. So that means you are 1000% committed. You have focus, you have attention, you have perseverance to listen to me talk for for this long. But all that joking aside, I absolutely 100% believe in you, and I'm super excited for 2025 and just to watch all of you grow into better and better versions of the person you are working on becoming. So I'm cheering you on. Everyone in this community is cheering you on, and you got this.